Man carries injured wolf to vet for hours. Then the unthinkable happens. It was a quiet morning deep in the heart of the forest. Ben, a seasoned forest ranger, had made this journey many times before. He loved the early hours, the way the mist hung low between the trees, and how the silence wrapped around him like an old friend. The forest was his life, and he knew every trail, every sound, and every creature that called this place home. But that morning something felt different. As he moved through the trees, his radio silent, and the forest still, he suddenly heard it, a sound that stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't the usual rustling of branches or the call of distant birds. This was something else, something full of pain. It was a deep, haunting howl that echoed through the woods, sending a chill down Ben's spine. He had never heard anything like it before. Ben stood still, listening carefully. The howl came again, louder this time, more desperate. His instincts kicked in. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, it needed help. Without wasting another second, he pushed through the underbrush, heading straight toward the sound. The forest grew thicker as he went in deeper, his boots crunching over leaves and twigs. The air was cold, and with each step the sound grew louder, closer. His heart pounded harder in his chest. Then through the trees he saw it. There, lying in a small clearing, was a wolf. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. It was a large, powerful animal, but in that moment it was anything but. Its leg was caught in a cruel steel trap, its fur matted with blood. The wolf lay on its side, panting heavily, its eyes dull with pain and exhaustion. Ben stopped a few feet away, his breath catching in his throat. This was no ordinary situation. The wolf was hurt badly, and time was running out. For a moment he hesitated. Approaching a wild, injured animal like this was dangerous, even for someone with his experience. But something in the wolf's eyes, something broken, yet pleading, pulled him forward. Ben knew he couldn't leave it behind. Ben stood frozen just a few feet away from the injured wolf. The animal's breathing was shallow, its body trembling from the pain, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. He could see the way the steel trap had dug deep into the wolf's leg, crushing muscle and bone. It was a terrible sight, one that stirred a sense of urgency inside him. He knew he couldn't just walk away, but the situation was dangerous. Wolves, especially ones in pain, could be unpredictable. One wrong move and it could lash out. Ben felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. His mind raced. He needed to help, but he couldn't just dive in without thinking. Quickly, Ben realized he wasn't equipped to free the wolf right then and there. He glanced back in the direction of the trail where he had parked his car several minutes away. He had the tools he needed, but leaving the wolf alone, even for a moment, seemed risky. Time was against him, but he had no choice. With one last look at the wolf, Ben turned and sprinted toward his car. His lungs burned as he tore through the underbrush, the forest blurring around him. Every second felt like it could be the wolf's last. When he finally reached his vehicle, he fumbled with the door, yanking it open to grab the wire cutters and a first aid kit. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't afford to waste any more time. Racing back to the clearing, Ben's heart sank when he saw the wolf again. Its breathing had slowed, its body limp. It was barely holding on. Kneeling beside it, Ben moved carefully, speaking softly as he worked. He used the cutters to snap through the metal, freeing the wolf's leg. The wolf let out a weak, low growl but didn't resist. The trap was off, but the wolf was in worse shape than he'd feared. Ben glanced at the path, thinking about the next step. His mind spun, trying to figure out what to do. But when he looked back, something else hit him like a punch to the gut. His car was gone. Ben couldn't believe his eyes. His car, which had been parked just down the trail, was gone. He stood there for a moment, his mind struggling to catch up with reality. Someone must have stolen it while he was rescuing the wolf. Now in the middle of nowhere, he was stranded with an injured wolf that had little time left. There was no time to think about who had taken the car or why. Ben's focus snapped back to the wolf. The animal lay motionless, barely clinging to life. The leg was bleeding badly and it wouldn't survive much longer without medical attention. Ben knew there was only one thing he could do. He knelt beside the wolf, carefully lifting its limp body into his arms. The wolf was heavy, but Ben didn't hesitate. His muscles strained under the weight as he started walking, the uneven forest floor making every step a challenge. The nearest town was miles away, but there was no other choice. He had to keep going. The journey was brutal from the start. The terrain was rough, with thick undergrowth and steep hills that slowed him down. Ben's boots slipped on wet leaves, and several times he nearly fell, but he held tight to the wolf, refusing to let it drop. The animal's body felt like a dead weight, growing heavier with each passing minute. As he pressed on, the sky darkened. A light rain began to fall, soaking Ben's clothes and making the path even more treacherous. His arms and legs ached. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he didn't stop. Every few moments he glanced down at the wolf, hoping to see some sign of life. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes half closed, and time was running out. The hours dragged on, and exhaustion weighed him down. But Ben kept moving. His mind pushed through the pain, focusing only on getting the wolf to help. At one point he thought he saw lights in the distance, but it was just his mind playing tricks. He wiped the rain from his eyes and kept walking, determined not to give up. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw it. A faint glow on the horizon. The town was close, but could he make it in time? Ben stumbled into the small veterinary clinic, drenched from the rain, his body trembling with exhaustion. His legs were about to give up, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the door, cradling the barely conscious wolf in his arms. The vet, Dr. Susan, looked up in shock from behind the reception desk. She'd seen injured animals before, but nothing like this. Without a word, she sprang into action, calling for her assistant and grabbing a gurney. Ben gently laid the wolf down, his hands shaking from the effort. He could barely catch his breath as he watched Dr. Susan quickly assess the situation. Her face was serious, but she didn't hesitate. She nodded to her assistant and they wheeled the wolf into the back room. Ben collapsed into a chair, his body completely spent. His clothes were soaked and he could still feel the sting of every branch and rock he had encountered along the way. But none of that mattered now. All he could do was wait and hope the wolf would survive. Time seemed to stretch out as the minutes turned into hours. The steady hum of the clinic filled the silence, broken only by the occasional footstep of the staff hurrying in and out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Susan emerged. Ben stood up, his heart pounding, fearing the worst, but her face held a small, tired smile. The wolf was stable. The relief washed over him in waves. He had done it. The wolf was going to live. Just as Ben was about to sit down and breathe for the first time in hours, the clinic door flew open. A wildlife officer rushed in, his arms full. Wrapped in blankets were 3 small bundles, each one wriggling slightly. Ben blinked in confusion as the officer hurried to Dr. Susan, urgently explaining something Ben couldn't quite hear. And then it hit him. The blankets weren't just blankets. They held wolf pups. 3 tiny, helpless pups, barely old enough to open their eyes. Ben's breath caught in his throat. These weren't just any wolves. They were her pups. The wolf he had just saved was a mother, and now her babies had found their way to her. Ben stood there watching in awe as Dr. Susan carefully brought the wolf pups into the back room where their mother lay recovering. The small wriggling bundles were barely visible in the vet's arms, but their faint whimpers filled the air. Ben's heart swelled as he realized what had just unfolded. The mother wolf, weak but alive, lifted her head when the pups were placed beside her. It was a sight that should stay with Ben forever. Despite her injuries, despite the ordeal she had been through, the wolf instinctively nudged her pups closer, her eyes softening in a way Ben had never imagined possible for such a wild, fierce creature. Dr. Susan stepped back, giving the mother and her baby space, and Ben felt his breath catch in his throat. The pups nuzzled into their mother's fur, and the wolf, though still weak, wrapped her body protectively around them. It was a reunion neither Ben nor anyone else in that room could have predicted. Against all odds, not only had the mother wolf survived, but she was now reunited with her pups. They had been saved, all of them. Ben felt a wave of emotion rush over him. The long, grueling journey, the exhaustion, the fear, it all faded away in that moment. Everything he had done, every painful step through the forest had led to this. He hadn't just saved the life of a single animal. He had saved a family. Dr. Susan turned to Ben, a tired but warm smile on her face. The relief was palpable. The pups were safe. The mother was stable. Ben gave a nod, still taking it all in. He hadn't expected the day to turn out like this, but somehow it had. The unthinkable had happened, and it left him in quite awe. As he finally stepped outside into the cool night air, the rain had stopped. The forest seemed peaceful again. Ben stood for a moment, looking up at the sky, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift from his shoulders. He knew that this was one of those rare moments in his life where everything comes together in the most unexpected and beautiful way. The forest would feel different now, knowing that somewhere out there a mother wolf and her pups were alive because of him. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below, and make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.